All right, well, I'm pleased to be here today and want to thank the organizers for the invitation. This is one of those conferences where I sometimes feel like I'm a fish out of water. So my background's in computer science, and I gradually moved to doing more and more health technology research. And I think what I'm going to say today is a nice bookend to what you've heard so far, which is moving not just from big data of big data sets, but down to the individual level and a new type of big data that's just on the horizon. My disclosures are that some of the work I'll talk about was funded by the NIH, but otherwise I don't have any. And my interest and expertise really break down into two areas. One is continuously measuring sort of messy human behavior and trying to figure out how do we build computational models of that. That's really the computer science part of what I do. And then thinking about how we would use that information, especially if your mobile phone or your devices can figure out what you're doing, to create new just-in-time interventions that are very highly tailored to you and what you're doing and what you just did. And that's really health and behavioral modeling. And I think there's a huge opportunity that you're going to start to see more work in, which combines human-computer interaction, sensors and machine learning, and behavioral science. And right in the middle is this sweet spot for science and also health, and where we're going to leverage consumer technologies and mobile technologies and be able to start to deliver interventions that are highly tailored both on sort of from what you're doing with your body to your home and workplace community, sort of everywhere you are, very personal and in situ types of interventions. And that's going to enable real-time interactive measurement that hopefully can help science and real-time interactive intervention. So I work in the space of personal health informatics, which is person-facing sorts of technologies that support health and wellness. And one of my motivations is that improving measures can really catapult discovery. And you see this at a massive scale with starting off with simple telescopes, and gradually we built more and more complex measurement tools. And every time that we do, the field usually takes a big advance forward. So there's a picture from the Hubble, right? So nobody would dispute that having better measurement tools helps. And at a conference like this, you might think about at the other scale, the micro scale, you've got microscopes, and gradually that technology has become more sophisticated over time. Each time that happens, we can learn a whole lot. This is DNA data, right, down at a very, very small scale. But what about at the behavioral scale? And that's where my interest is. And the reason is because there's really an elephant in the room at meetings like this and at sort of typical NIH grant review meetings, which is that all of the stuff that we heard about so far today, or much of it, is really based on really poor measures at some level. And most of the folks in the field essentially know this, but it's sort of the best that we have, and so we make do with it. But we know that understanding behavior is hugely important. And so if you look at familial and twin studies, we know that genes are important, but behavior and your exposures to what you're doing in your environment are also extremely important, and we've heard about that today. So the exposome, as some call it, involves what's going on in our body and in our environment, but then we have things like diet and drugs and stress and behavior and lifestyle, and if we can measure these better, we're going to be able to make more advances in terms of our scientific understanding about what's going on with us. So what are those important behaviors and states? Well, here we're talking about diet, which is often biased towards what is eaten, although we've heard a little bit about breaking out of that here today. But we may also want to think about also when and how, and I'll talk about that a bit. But we also have physical activity and sedentary behavior, risky behaviors, medication adherence, social context and socialization, assessment of pain, stress and stressors, affective state. These are all things that we know we have to measure better, but we have trouble doing so right now. If we can improve these measurements, we're going to be able to really, I think, leapfrog the science of understanding behavior and modeling it, much as we do in other fields where we build better measurement instruments. And so what could we do at this behavioral scale? Well, we might identify patterns by computer, simultaneously measure across these silos on this previous slide. Researchers tend to sit in these silos. We might measure across those silos a bit more, find unexpected relationships, and improve behavioral models, and ultimately reduce noise and advance science. And we know there's a need for this. So in an area I work more in, which is physical activity, if you look at the NHANES survey and you look at physical activity, where we have both paper surveys and objective measures, motion sensors, accelerometers, what you see is that if you ask via self-report or look at the self-report surveys, about 45% of US adults would meet the physical activity guidelines. But if you look at what the measurement says based on the objective monitors, it's less than 5% meeting the guidelines. So there's a huge difference here, something going on, right, in our measurements. And we know we want more objective measurement. And I would argue that in diet, it could be worse, okay? Because it's actually very, very hard to indicate what you eat, which if you've used some of these dietary measures on yourself, I do with my students in my classes, I have them take some of these, you realize how problematic they really are. They make you feel as very uncomfortable, actually, when you fill them out, I think. And so we have self-report, 24-hour recall records, and food frequency questionnaires, which we know have significant measurement error, like recall bias and observer bias, high respondent burden, and can be costly to process, at least most of those methods. And I think experts in the dietary field have pointed this out for a long time. And if you take a look at a food frequency questionnaire, here's one of Harvard's food frequency questionnaires, and you actually try to sit down and fill it out, you realize why. And if you I have my students fill these out and I ask them, what do you think afterwards? And they all sort of say, this is what our science is based on, you know, this type of thing. Because can you really answer a question well of how much corn you've eaten over the last, year or months or days accurately? It's just a very difficult question to answer, right? And so we've tried the community has tried to develop better tools. So the ASA 24 developed by the NIH, for example, is a way to get a 24-hour recall on a computer where you don't necessarily have to have a person administering the survey. And if anybody's tried to take this, there's a little penguin and it kind of leads you through. But it's it's a good tool. It's better than nothing, but it takes a really long time to do even a single day on this tool. It's pretty tedious, and you have to be pretty dedicated to want to get through it and really do a good job. And so going back to these types of surveys, right, and here's the part where it asks about chocolate. So one of the things I do in my classes is I went to the New York Times at some point and I looked up chocolate and diet, and I just found a bunch of articles because I deal in human-computer interaction and I want to build interfaces that actually help people. So it's one thing to know if there's a correlation, but I really want to understand causality, and I want to build things that are going to help people change their behavior. But the problem that we deal with is that if you look at something like chocolate, so here are articles I pulled from the New York Times, and they start in 1998, I think. So this is, look at just the titles of these. Chocolate a health food, maybe keep the aspirin. The problem with chocolate, the claim, chocolate can be disruptive to sleep. Chocolate in moderation may help the heart. Okay, so we went from bad to good. Milk, chocolate milk may be a problem. The chocolate diet, so chocolate may be better. Chocolate may not be hazardous to your waistline, as hazardous to your waistline as you think, at least in moderation. To improve memory, consider chocolate. Why chocolate is good for us. Okay, so that's from a credible source, the New York Times. Now we know there's lots of issues with that, right? But this is what the public hears. And I would argue the public hears that because many of these studies are based on the survey where it's asking you how many candy bars did you eat in the last year, right? Or things like that. So what do we do about that? We need to focus on building better measures so we can ask better questions and ultimately design better interventions. And so I want to plant a seed in your head, which is that we're going to have this thing that some people call sort of small big data or individual level intensive longitudinal measurement. And in diet in particular, I pulled some papers from, this is not my work, other groups, looking at what they're trying to do here. So essentially, there are a number of groups where they're trying to take mobile phones and have people take pictures of their food or little mini videos of their food where you rotate the phone over the food. And then you want to use computer vision and speech recognition to try to help people develop a record of what they ate, where it automatically figures out as much as it can, and then it uses your speech, if in some cases asks you what you ate, and combines all this together, maybe with a little bit of other self-report, and tries to figure out what you're up to. And normally it involves something like this, taking a picture of your food, usually with a little fiducial marker, a little special marker that helps the computer vision. Here's a different group. You can see how they have the nice checkered tablecloth to help out the computer vision. I used to do computer vision, so I understand how hard it is. It's a very hard problem. And here they have, notice the plate of food, the way the food's laid out on the plate at the moment. But they're trying to ultimately calculate the volume and the nutrient and food intake in these foods through the pictures that people take. And they also are looking at having a front-facing camera that sort of takes pictures periodically of what you're doing, and it will happen to capture food that's sitting in front of you as you're eating it, and might also capture the progression of how you eat that food. And then the goal is to then try to figure out what is that food. So here, maybe a little hard to see, but it's essentially here trying to detect in the picture taken from the front-facing camera, the plate first to isolate the food, and then they're trying to map a volume onto that food to ultimately figure out the volume of the food, right? So this is what they're trying to do. And the trick here is that you want to know, you have to know both the type of food, is it a cheesecake or what is it, and also the geometry if you truly want to get a volume. And so here it's probably very hard to see, but they're sort of putting a triangular sort of shape on this, a square sort of shape on this, a circular sort of shape on this to try to estimate the volume. So these are all valiant efforts, but I'm sorry it's getting close to lunch. You know, this is what real food looks like that people actually eat. This and this, right? So if you remember the food that you saw on some of those pictures, it's a single bit of food, or it's nicely laid out, very differently colored food, right? This is real food. This is real food. This is real food. That's the reality, right? And so even if you know what the volume of this is, you may not know what the type of the food is, and estimating the volume is very hard. And you don't know if somebody poured, you know, about 3 or 4 or 5 tablespoons of oil or butter on top of this as well. And so it's a really hard problem to do this fully automatically. I think we're a ways off. But if we start thinking about beyond the sort of what is the food, and think about when, how, where, with whom, and why are people eating, drinking, and making decisions about diet, there's a lot we can potentially do. And so there are other groups looking at things like detecting chewing via, or eating via chewing, where a little device is sort of on your ear, near your ear, around your neck, and it detects sounds to detect chewing, and in some cases even types of food chewed. And then others looking at on-body sensors on the arms, the wrists, and then also sound-based things maybe around your neck or on your ear to detect food intake, chewing, and swallowing. And others looking at wrist audio from something like a smartwatch, just the sound of the audio on the smartwatch, can it detect whether or not you're eating or not? And actually they didn't do so well, but with one particular algorithm they started to do pretty well on a small test data set. Now most of these studies are done in the lab, they're small pilots at this point, but there's a number of creative approaches that engineers and computer scientists are working on to try to get this so that we can understand not just what people are eating, but when they're eating, in some cases passively, in some cases with self-report, using everything from mobile phone pictures and scanning over the food with the phone to all the way to analyzing receipts in various ways. And this is done, they're trying to do it both with full and semi-automation. And so here's the opportunity to sort of break down these silos and start studying not just diet, but what are all the other factors in our behavior that are influencing what we eat and when we eat. So the eating behaviors, physical activity, stress, sleep, affective state, physiological states, medication adherence, and risky behaviors. And this is what's been really hard to do up until now. Those surveys give us very little information about this. What we just heard about is starting to get at a little bit of this, right? And what we ultimately may want are the triggers and the habits that lead people to eat what they eat. So a takeaway from my talk here is that this big data at the individual scale really could transform science and healthcare, I think, as we know it, where mobile devices and sensing play a key role. And the bottom line is that our old tools really provide very crude snapshots of behavior, but we're on the cusp of being able to change that quite dramatically and start thinking about looking at the dynamics and the interesting relationships between behaviors that we've been just totally unable to explore up until now. So we need new approaches to do that. Folks are working on them. So I work more in physical activity, but this applies to diet and physical activity. Think about today, what we mostly have in behavioral science is surveys that give us behavioral snapshots with limited information about context, limited information about dynamics, sometimes costly to get people to do, and with very limited information on the why of their decision making, which if you want to make interventions ultimately is what you actually need. It's nice to know a correlation, but it's actually totally insufficient to make interventions. But soon we could have open source phone apps with optional add-on sensors with months of continuous and dynamic data from individual citizen scientists donating their information for the sake of science that give us context and purpose information and allow us to supplement what we have today, which is the hypothesis-driven investigations to understand correlations, and augmenting that with also the data-driven, both top-down and bottom-up that we heard about earlier, types of approaches that are going to support new science, but also the design of interventions. So I won't go into this. This is a busy slide, but on your what is it? Your left there, it talks about hospital data sets, which you could also think of as sort of, in some cases, some of these traditional research data sets. They're very controlled in some ways, but they're also sort of focused on people who are sick or have, they have issues already, and they're very temporally sparse. But there's this new type of sort of behavioral small big data that's going to be very temporally dense. And it could be collected on people when they're perfectly healthy, and you could keep collecting it on them as they go through various medical stages in their life. And the only challenge with this data set right now is that this type of data, it's messy. It's the big data that was talked about earlier. It may be gathered from people's Fitbits and their mobile phones, and they're going to be interacting with it in some way. And so you get this very sort of messy big data, the V's that were talked about earlier. But we might get huge numbers of data points from small numbers of people. But that's only until those data sets are actually huge as well. Because if you've heard about initiatives like Obama's precision medicine initiative and the cohort program they want to build, the NIH wants to build, they're talking about having at least 1 million Americans participating where they can voluntarily sign up to be citizen scientists and contribute the type of data that I'm talking about here, as well as perhaps their genetic data. And so what we might have from these people are what you call digital footprints. And those footprints might be from things that are directly related to eating. Maybe they take pictures of some of the food that they eat. But it could also be about a lot of other things that a dietitian might not think are relevant to eating, but might help us better understand the eating behavior. So it's really the combination of lots of different types of sensors that are going to help us resolve the ambiguity in any one sensor source. So to give you an example of that, if you have a Fitbit, you know that it's not very accurate at detecting some of the things that you do. But if you have a different sensor that's on your car, right, it's going to help, and you can combine that data with what the Fitbit has, then you're going to be able to, a computer is going to be able to do a better job of interpreting both the Fitbit data and the car data. So as the data sources come together, we're going to be able to do better detection of what's going on with eating and diet by taking things like physical activity sensors and bringing them together. This new measurement technology, why do we want it? So most behaviors are interrelated, but today we study them in a vacuum. Until recently, physical activity researchers and sleep researchers hardly ever talk to each other, which seems kind of crazy. Dietary decision making seems to be studied sort of out of context of, in some cases, of sleep-related behaviors, physical activity, stress. While understanding correlation is interesting, causality is what we really want if we want to design solutions. So things like understanding the relationship between diet and screen time, we know there's a correlation, but what's the causality? We need the causality to figure out how to design tailored interventions. Sometimes measuring multiple behaviors together may simplify measuring a particular behavior, as I just mentioned. So if I know location, it might help me with diet. If I know about driving, it might help me with eating. Most people are creatures of habit, and they tend to do the same things over and over again. And so longitudinal data could reveal those habits and ultimately allow us to get into the details. So I'll give you an example from physical activity, the space I've been working in primarily. What we're trying to do is create a new type of measure for physical activity, sort of your next generation Fitbit, you could think of it as. And in this case, a researcher would upload a study to an app store, which is downloaded to somebody's phone that has a built-in accelerometer. And then you get 24/7 real-time activity recognition on the phone with some context-sensitive self-report based on GPS location. And new surveys can be uploaded by the researcher to the phone on a regular basis, and the data is sent back to the researcher. And then if the researcher wants, they can send some additional sensors to that person to wear, with the goal being that the person gets just in the habit of wearing them, like people do with their Fitbit sort of devices, and ultimately develop sort of data collection habits. So this becomes a part of their life, contributing data. It's not something that they just do for a week. And then the phone itself may provide real-time compliance to encourage people to be able to do that. And then the goal is, can we develop new measures and validate those, and then ultimately add them to things like the NIH digital toolkits that they're developing now for measures. And can we do this over years? So can we start to study not just weeks of data from an individual, but months or years of data? And so in our case, we looked at existing monitors, and you would think there would be some that would actually work for what we want to do, but there weren't, so we built other ones, little research grade monitors, thin ones that you could kind of wear under your clothing versus the Actigraph here, kind of a standard one. And the idea is that we recruit people and they just wear these continuously. And so they wear them under their clothes, one or more. They go about their day. They use their phone normally. The phone collects the data every minute, including all the raw data, so we can run algorithms that try to process what they're doing. And at night, they plug in their phone next to their bed and data is transmitted to the lab. And then the phone can be used for self-report. So we're working towards being able to detect automatically the type, duration, intensity, and location of their physical activity, but also, are they communicating, are there social interaction, their use of technology, and ultimately we want to know, are they eating or not, and when, with some self-reported state. So if you look at data like this is just data from my mobile phone's accelerometer, and when I'm in a kind of a meeting like this, and you can see exactly what happened. I got up in the morning, I ate breakfast, I walked to a meeting, I was sitting all day, there was a break, I was sitting, there was little breaks for lunch, I was sitting, a little break, I was sitting, and then I walked to dinner, right? And I know exactly what I did. So there's also an opportunity of not only collecting the data, but presenting it back to somebody the night of or the next day, and having them help label that data to get us at a greater amount of detail. So we do lots of lab experiments where we put all sorts of sensors on people and we ask them to do stuff and we label what they're doing, and then we try to detect those activities. And I won't go into this, but just to say that if we're trying to detect postures and ambulation and not worrying about intensity so much, we can do a pretty good job of overall recognizing what they're doing. And even without individual training data, we can do okay. But what we really want to do, and this is data from me wearing a wrist and an ankle accelerometer, where I've manually labeled what I do, we want to detect the habits of people over time. And so I'm showing you this because if you look at what's going on with me, I'm sort of going about my boring kind of everyday life. I have posture shifts during sleeping here. And then here's the morning, and I get up in the morning and I walk my dog. Now from the accelerometer data, you're not going to know that I walk my dog. You're not going to be able to detect that. But if you look at this data over time, you see patterns. Here's me hitting snooze once every 15 minutes, okay? So if we keep going through, as I walk around, there's sort of big spikes, right? And then posture shifts during sleep. Other meetings and sort of walking around. But here's another day. So here's me hitting snooze. Here's me walking my dog. Okay? So think about systems that recognize what you do, and if they see a pattern and they don't know what it is, we're at the point where today it can just ask me what did you do. I say I walked my dog. And now when it sees that same pattern again, it can say, for me, that's him walking the dog. And maybe even that's him hitting the snooze, right? That's where we're at today, where we're going to be able to do this. Because we don't take advantage of habits to actually collect data. And we also want to collect data on the habits. And I think that's a big sort of takeaway message. I'm going to skip through this slide here and just say that what we're trying to do ultimately is reinvent self-report. We want to use passive sensing where we can. But we also need new ways to gather data that requires self-report. So we do traditional sampling on a mobile phone, prompts ask a question. But we also do context-sensitive prompting on the phone, where the phone measures your physical activity and then prompts you and asks you about that, yes or no. Or in the case of a study with kids, 5 minutes after they use their inhaler. That data all gets sent back to us. We can run studies like this remotely, check whether or not people are answering surveys, see what their data actually looks like. And then we build tools on the phone where they can look at their own data, and if there's a chunk the computer doesn't understand, they can click on a button and then they can label what it was. And so we want the computer to label as much as it can, where they kind of help out eventually to get a 24-hour record of what they're up to. The last thing I'll mention is that we're also looking at data from things like credit cards. This is student debit card kind of information. And if you plot data like this where somebody uses their card, you can see patterns in the behavior. So these things are going to a coffee place. These lines here going to a Dunkin' Donuts. And those are habits that are in that individual's data. So the key points, we're looking at small data versus big data. Mobiles are going to allow us to collect that information. And we're going to be able to do person-level, real-time kind of inference on that data. And ultimately, we need time to do this. Some of the problems are really hard, especially those computer vision types of problems. But be on the lookout, because these systems are inevitably coming. They're going to be here. Semi-automation, real-time crowdsourcing, and rich sort of computation are going to allow us to build new types of tools we don't have today. Thank you.
So again, if we have some quick questions, then yes, please.
Hi, Jessica Wu from Cincinnati Children's Hospital. This is a great talk. One of the questions that I have comes from sort of my own personal anecdotal experience, which is you talked about people getting used to providing data, and that would be sort of a go-to sort of baseline for people if they got used to it. Anecdotally and personally, I find that, I've used some of these, and say MyFitnessPal, where you can put in your, it's pretty easy to track your diet. It's a nice tool. It's very user-friendly, and I do it for a little while, and then I get tired of it, and I don't do it anymore. Mm-hmm. How do you overcome things like that, where you've got to get information from the person, but it doesn't get ingrained into a long-term, you were talking about years, these kinds of habits they don't become habits easily. And so I'm wondering how you would overcome something like that.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think the right answer is to design ways that people use the data that they like, which may have nothing to do with health whatsoever. And it's also not going to work for everybody. But it's reasonable to expect that there can be a relatively large cohort of people who will get in the habit of doing stuff. They already wear watches, they already carry phones, and as long as it's not burdening them, there's reasonable. We think we can come up with ways that they'll contribute that data. Now, that's a biased sample in many ways, and there's issues with that, but it doesn't mean that we can't learn a lot from those people and then figure out how to deploy other systems in other cases for other reasons.
We're going to keep taking questions, but in the meantime, I'm going to ask the other speakers to come up to the stage, so we'll be ready for the more open. So Dr. Ordovez and Dr. Lee, if you make your way up.
Richard Black, thank you very much. It was very interesting. One question for clarification, then a suggestion. On the clarification on the patterns, you say, gee, this is me walking the dog, and now I can recognize that. But it may sometime be not you walking the dog. It might be something similar, and there's the assumption or presumption, the modeling says, yes, a small amount of error is introduced. I presume that most of the time it is you walking the dog, that the amount of error introduced by some other activity that looks similar but isn't, is not enough to outweigh the benefit of that expectation, I guess.
Right, so I would argue that the amount of error that we would have from this relative to the amount of error that you have with a recall survey is going to be orders of magnitude different.
Got it.
And the idea is that occasionally it's real time in the sense that if it sees that I'm walking the dog, eventually it would ask me again on my watch, are you walking the dog? and then try to confirm or deny. So there's two things it can do. It could look for outliers automatically and say it doesn't look quite normal, and so I'll ask. And it can also say it looks normal, but I need to verify that's still what's going on. So I'll ask.
Got it. So the suggestion is, I was having a conversation with Derek Yak, who works in health space, and Vitality is the company he works for, and they do a thing where they actually give people an Apple Watch or a Samsung or something like that, and then they have to be active because with to see the price that they would pay for that watch decline, and they actually watch this decline, and if they're inactive, the price goes back up. And so it's a loss avoidance thing, and he can actually keep people being active so that at the end, end of some period of time, they don't have to pay for the watch, right? And they can watch that, can track their behavior like that. So that might be a way to get people to, you don't have to tie it to behavior, it could be tied to inputting the information, as the other person was asking, how do we get people to do this? And it's a loss avoidance model, but the insurance industry is looking at this, and you might do well to talk to them.
Josh Anthony, Campbell Soup Company. Thank you for a great talk. Somewhat related to the other two questions and following on habits, which of the data do you find is most motivating for enabling behavior change? And does it depend on the health state of the individual? For example, for somebody that's relatively healthy, is it more kind of goal-oriented to work out more? Is sometimes the data more motivating for somebody that may have a health issue? Right, so I have a heart issue, so I'm going to be more motivated to watch my sodium intake, exercise more, what have you.
Yeah, I can't really answer that question because part of it is we don't know how to make interventions that really work for the most part at this point. My own personal interest is in studying timing. Because I'm looking for things that computers can do well that people can't, and one of the things a computer could do well is detect a habit and understand the timing and be very patient, wait until you do something, and then positively reward it. And we think we can get computers to do that, and it's something that's very hard to get people to do. But the reason that some of us in health technology space are working on these types of things is to explore what sort of interventions work. But what we know is that the models that we have, the health behavior theories that we have right now are too general to help us really figure out how do we use new technologies to build totally new types of interventions. We need more computationally based models of activity at this person level. And what's going to be really exciting is when those person level models connect up with the big data sort of population scale models, that's when I think you're going to see a real sort of more rapid advance in science because of this new type of behavioral measurement tool.
Hi, Susan Johnson, University of Colorado, Anschutz. So I work in the area of dietary intake for young children. And in that scenario, you have the added complexity of an adult proxy reporting on the child. And I'm wondering if you could give us any insights into innovations that relate to reporting for other individuals and how we can improve our dietary intake measures.
Yeah, I haven't worked on that in particular, but I think there's a lot of opportunity. In part, it sort of depends totally on the age of the child as well. If
Birth to 5.
Okay, so in that case, they're not going to have their own mobile phones, right?
You probably don't want them to.
Right. I think they have to be at least like 6 before they get mobile phones now, right? In that case, I mean, you can imagine that the device is just asking about what's going on with that other individual. I don't know, other than having the younger kid wearing sensors that's sort of communicating, right, sort of totally passive sensors, and maybe you can get some information from that triggers something on the parent's phone and says, what's going on right now, right? Tell me what's going on right now. So certainly with physical activity, you could do that.
Right.
For diet, it's harder, but if you think about some of these other technologies that are trying to detect eating, maybe they don't have to be perfect, right? They only have to help trigger the report at a time when you're most likely to get sort of meaningful information back.
Well, I guess my
I'd have to think about it more.
word is to encourage you to consider that scenario.
Yeah, I have to think about it more.
Great. We have one more question for you. You've
Sure.
stimulated a lot of questions.
I didn't want to take it all the time.
Hi, I'm Teresa Fung from Simmons College, not very far from where you are, just down the street from where you are. My question is about validation of the methods. So you're proposing that these using multiple sensors would be a better measurement for physical activity, diet, or other things. So it sounds like that you're proposing a platinum standard. And how do you validate this new standard? Is it possible to validate it outside very controlled laboratory setting?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think a lot of the work, especially coming from the engineering side, is validated in the lab. And so in my case, for physical activity, we put sensors on people, have them go about, and we follow them around, and we label what they do. And we do that in the lab, and then they also go out around campus, and they do kind of free living activities, but they're being followed around and labeled, you know, on a tablet what's going on. Where we need to move is to the next step, which is let them go out in the real world and then somehow understand what they're really doing. And people are looking at using those front-facing cameras as one way to do that. There are tricky issues with IRBs and stuff to be able to do that, but that's one way to do it. Another way is to sort of combine different data sources together where you know that you've got some data source that's pretty reliable one, and then they're out in the real world. You don't really know what's exactly going on, but you can validate it in something, right? But once you move outside the lab, it's pretty tough. It's tough, but that's what people are trying to figure out how to do now. But that's true of anything, though, really. Any other surveys as well.